Hi, and thank you again for joining me. We are at the end of the Holy Bible. I'm going to be doing chapters 21 and 22 of Revelation together. My King James Version references these two chapters as New Heaven, New Earth, and New Jerusalem, and the River of Life, and Jesus is coming. So thanks again for joining me. We have now got to the end of Revelation. We are in the good part. The earth has now been ruled and reigned by Jesus for 1,000 years. Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet have been cast into the lake of fire, and the judgment has taken place for all unbelievers. So we're moving into chapter 21. John sees a new heaven and a new earth from a distance. And unlike the other prophets in the Old Testament, a new heaven and a new earth has been shared with John so that he can share it with us. There is no more sea. So why was there a sea in the first earth, but there's not a sea in the second one? There are no judgments to follow. So I'll describe that a little bit more shortly. But there references a new city, which is the New Jerusalem. And this is made by the Father and will come down out of heaven. So it will descend from heaven, from God. God will bring the New Jerusalem down from the third heaven, from his kingdom realm, into wherever we reside at the time. This is something that we will witness. And this is a parallel to Genesis 1. Now that sin is gone, all the former things outlined in verse 4 have been removed. Jesus is reminding us here that he is the Word. He is the creator and the first creation and the end of all creation and the creator of righteousness. Jesus tells John, "Right, it is done. I am the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. For these words are true and faithful." The natural fruit of unbelievers in this moment will still be producing, but they are somewhere else. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22 to 24 says that the Godhead dwells in the city. An entire host of angels will be there, and the church saints, who is us, will be there, and the spirit of the righteous will be made perfect, and the Old Testament saints will also be there. And all humanity will experience this heaven and earth equally. The angel that had the bowls of the plagues ushers John over to show him the bride, the Lamb's wife. The title Bride of Christ transfers from the church as us, as believers, to a place. When Jesus brings us into faith, we become one body with Christ. So in the eternal age, he no longer dwells within us. He dwells with the Trinity in the temple, and we dwell with them all. John is described a perfect cube and is taken to a great high mountain and showed the great city descending out of heaven from God. The new city is 1,500 miles, 12,000 stadion long, by 1,500 miles wide, by 1,500 miles high, which is 144 cubits. There is a great and high wall with 12 entry gates, and these gates are never closed. The 12 entry gates representing the 12 tribes, the 12 nations of Israel, and they are memorials of prior to this creation. The gates are single pearls. There are walls of jasper and grounds of pure gold, and the light comes from the Lamb. There is no sun or moon. God illuminates the heaven and the earth. There is no temple because there is no longer any separation from God. And because there's no separation from the Godhead, the fullness of God can dwell together with us, which is outlined in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 24 and 28, which tells us that God may be all in all. The Godhead is the temple of the city. And verse 12 to 13 tells us that each gate has a name and an angel and the 12 tribes of Israel. One of the tribes is no longer, but we will never ever forget the life we came from. Number 3 is the number for Godhead, and number 12 is the ruling of God or the authority through people and the nation of Israel. On its cube side, there is a multi-layered foundation, 12 layers, representing the 12 apostles, the leaders of the church and the New Testament prophets. The church and Israel are distinct and working together in the plan of God. Paul in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 12 to 21, wrote about reconciliation of Jew and Gentile belief and recognition of Christ and the Father. One family built on Israel and the apostles of the church to full completion, 12 of each. The nations will walk in the light of the Lamb, and there is no night and no dark. 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 5 tells us that the first world was formed out of and by water. If you look at the creation account, you'll find the water was at the beginning of all things. The water was the material from which God was making things on the earth. And it was done that way, according to Peter, because God knew he would be using a large quantity to bring judgment over the earth. The earth also began from darkness. Light and dark created time for a purpose, as a count down, not a count up. The sun and moon created periods, signs, seasons, days and years, as outlined in Genesis chapter 1 verse 14. But now there is no need for signs or seasons or time. However, it's worth noting that months are counted, and they are counted through the fruit. Revelation chapter 22 tells us that the river of life is in the middle of the street, and the throne of God comes crystal water. The tree of life exists there. This is the same tree from Genesis chapter 2 verse 8. But no tree of the knowledge of good and evil exists. When man and woman sinned, they were removed from the tree of life. This is outlined in Genesis 3 chapter 22 to 24. And a new fruit each month comes off this tree of life, and the leaves have healing power. The tree is why the body won't die. The Lord made choices to the first creation, fully anticipating sin, and the creation was planned for it and to use it to understand our situation. But he changes them in the new heaven and earth because there is no requirement for it. No illustration is required. The world was built with an intention for sin to come. And although he did not author the sin, it was always created as part of the plan of God. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 4 to 6 tells us that he chose us before sin. The creation was put in place to allow God an opportunity to express his nature through creation and be glorified through it. And it allows us to understand all sides and the full nature of God. And we need this polarity to understand him. Verse 11 says, "The Spirit is the one who shows and reveals to us the truth contained within the book." That means that many who listen and read Revelation will not hear or understand. Verse 15 says, "The attitude of the unbeliever is these characteristics." Understand and learning about this book should change the way your life, your death, the way you live, and the way you look at everything. And this, my friends, is the blessing of Christ. I pray that you be ready for his coming, because the time is near. Amen. God bless.